that, or it's recording. Okay.
Now.
Pause, everybody. It is great to see everyone today. We have been doing webinars through the spring on the PPP and loan forgiveness, and it's quite exciting for us to be here today to help you work your way through the PPP loan forgiveness spreadsheet. Now, if you, just even before I make introductions, let me just say, if you are not yet a recipient of that loan forgiveness spreadsheet and you want to send us a request for it, at the bottom of this Zoom, you will see a Q&A tab. Please use that for any questions or to request the loan forgiveness spreadsheet. And we'll do our best to get it to you even now before the webinar starts. We were hoping to get it posted at the webinar in the chat, but that's not working. So if you need it, then I see a couple people have already asked for the spreadsheet, and we have Anna here who's helping us, and she will do her best to get that spreadsheet to you now. Now, don't worry if we can't get it to you for any reason. We'll look at these Q&As afterwards, and we'll get it to you promptly. Okay. So let me go back to the beginning then and introduce, first of all, myself. I'm Karen Ryan. I'm the founder and managing member of Missionwell. And my co-presenter here, and actually he's the big presenter, is Jeff Quack. And Jeff is fairly new to Missionwell. He's one of our fabulous accountants here. He came to us from the LA Phil, and this autumn is going to be starting a program in marriage and family therapy at Fuller Seminary. So you can already tell by just that that he's cool, but when you get to know him, you get to know that he's even cooler. We're going to be looking quite small. We're going to right now start the screen sharing. Jeff's about to start the screen sharing for the webinar. And what we'll be doing is I'm going to monitor the Q&A for Jeff, and he's going to run us through the spreadsheet, but he's also going to be asking me questions. I'll be asking him questions, and we're kind of trying to mimic what we think the questions you have are going to be. So, first of all, if you see the question already in the Q&A, don't repeat it because, or just, click on the yes, I like this question too. But if there's already, I think, 34 questions in the Q&A, all right? So we want to be sure that we're getting those answered as we can be, although most of them right now are about just getting the spreadsheet. But again, if you don't get it now, you'll get it afterwards. So Jeff's got the spreadsheet going up right now, and the spreadsheet, he'll walk you through this in just a second, all the tabs here. And I just want to say right up front, though, that Missionwell, we're providing this as a courtesy to you, but it's not, does not constitute professional advice. We are not attorneys, and we're not CPAs either, but we do have a lot of business partners who are in the nonprofit and religious space. That's all that we do is work with nonprofits and religious organizations. And we are their business office. And because we're their business office, we get involved with them and working on their PPP loan applications and the PPP loan forgiveness. Now, that doesn't mean, we have everything 100%, but my goodness, we have a lot of expertise and experience in this topic. So just because we have a lot of business partners and they have a lot of different circumstances that come up. We do update our website from time to time with new information. So check back if you want information about the PPP loans for forgiveness. Also, I just want to say as a caveat on this spreadsheet that we're not guaranteeing everything's going to be right for you. We have made simplifying assumptions just to keep the spreadsheet manageable. And you might have to make some modifications to use this for yourself. Jeff will show you which some of the main spreadsheets, the summary, the salary and wage reduction, and the FTE reductions. He shows you those. We'll let you know what the password to unprotect those is if you want to make changes in those particular sheets. Other sheets you can't change. they're using a different password, but those you can because we know that you might want to modify the spreadsheet for your personal circumstances. With that, let me turn it over to Jeff, and he's going to start walking us through the spreadsheet. And thank you, Jeff, for being here. I'm just delighted that you're able to do this for everybody.
Thank you, Karen, for the introduction. Let us start off with just an overview of all the tabs in the spreadsheet in this workbook. Oops, sorry, I have trouble. Oh, just a lag, probably. The first spreadsheet, using this spreadsheet is, there's some definitions of qualified expenses. So for the time, you can read them over later. It might help you kind of define some of the terms that we use. At the bottom part of this, using this spreadsheet tab, there is 2 check boxes. So it kind of determines whether you need to use the safe harbor portion that we're going to talk about later in the SNW tab and the FTE tab. So we can touch on that later. We'll just give a big overview currently. So to remind you, there's also an easy form version of the 3508. If you have been watching the previous webinars by Karen, you'll have heard about it already. And also, for all the payroll data that we'll need to populate all the spreadsheets, you have to talk to your payroll company for all the specific reports that you'll need. And next on the summary tab, here is where you enter all your company's information, the loan amounts, your payroll data, your expenses. We'll talk in more details later. In the next tab, S&W stands for salary and wage reduction. So here's where you're going to enter all your data for your individual employees, all their individual payroll data, kind of like a breakdown of a payroll summary in short. And on the right-hand side, if you scroll to the right a little bit, it might be a little bit small. Let me zoom in a little bit for you. So this is the safe harbor data, the safe harbor portion of it. We'll talk in more details about it later. In the next tab, the FTE, which stands for full-time E. What does E stand for, Karen?
Full-time equivalence, Jeff. That's right. A great question.
It's for measuring whether someone is full-time, kind of like a ratio of whether they are full-time, part-time. We'll talk in details about this later. And on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's also a FTE safe harbor. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The last 2 tabs are documents required for whatever form you have chosen, either 3508 or 3508EZ. Those are a lot of details, what kind of documentation you need to provide. We'll go through that a little bit later. So let's go back to the beginning of using this spreadsheet. There are the terms on top, and on the bottom section of it, there's 2 checkboxes as we have mentioned. So it says, which parts of the spreadsheet do you need to complete? So if you check one of these boxes, you won't have to complete the safe harbor portions of both S&W reduction tab and FTE tab. So just checking either of these 2 boxes will kind of, you will not need to complete those portions. So what the 2 check boxes are, you have not reducted any hours in your employees, or you're unable to operate between February 15 due to, let's say, local government standards or CDC standards saying you cannot operate safely. That's why you could not have that FTE level up to what is required. So checking either one of these boxes would allow you to skip over those sections. And For 30, so how can you use 3008 EZ form? Is if you check one of these boxes and your S&W reduction tab at box 3, let me show you, which is right here, right next to the safe harbor. If that's zero, then you may use the easy form. So Karen, why would we need to use the easy form? What's so special about it? Is it a better form, easier form?
Well, that's a great question, Jeff. So the easy form, it's not as easy as you might think, actually. You still have to go through quite a few of the same calculations that you go through for the full form just to prove that you are eligible to use the easy form. You see how you've said check box 3 up here for, to determine if you're eligible to use the easy form? Well, you're probably halfway or 2/3 of the way through the work of the spreadsheet just to get to box 3. So it's not going to save you a whole lot of time, but if you don't have to do the safe harbor calculations in the salary and wage reduction tab or the safe harbor calculations in the FTE reduction tabs, that will save you some time. If you can use it, I would use it. I would definitely use it. You will save time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's move on to the summary tab. This is where most of the data is incorporated. Here is you enter your company's name. These are just for yourself. If you want to keep track of your loan number, your EIDL loan number. But this amount is important. Entering your SBA loan amount and your EIDL loan amount will help us calculate how much is forgivable later on. And over here, there's a drop-down menu. We've incorporated that you can choose monthly, semi-monthly, bi-weekly, weekly, whatever your payroll period is. And here, you're going to enter when the loan was funded by the bank. So when you have saw the amount appear on your bank portal, that's when you would enter it. And below here, you can choose 24 or 8 weeks. As you can see, there's a little note here. So based on your starting date for your loan forgiveness period, you may choose an 8-week or 24-week covered period forgiveness. So maybe you have heard from Karen previously, if your loan disbursement date is before June 5th, then you can choose either 8-week or 24-week. But if it's afterwards, you can only choose 24-week. Am I correct?
That's right. You got that right, Jeff. That's right. And for most of you, using the 24, it's not going to restrict you because you can file for your forgiveness as soon as you are ready. So if you get up to 100% and you don't have to wait until December 31st for the safe harbor, final safe harbor period to see if you've got your salary and wages and or your full-time equivalents back up, then you can submit for your forgiveness as soon as you're ready. So having the 24 is a gift. It's not a constraint. It's not going to constrain you from filing when you're ready.
So on most cases, it's better to have 24 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. But there is, PPP has provided an alternate covered period. It's actually to make it easier to calculate all the payroll data. So what it does is you can enter the first date. So instead of using the loan disbursement date, you can use the first day of your pay period. But there's one constraint, is that it has to be bi-weekly or more frequent, meaning it can only be, your payroll has to be paid every 2 weeks or weekly or more frequent, because that really helps us populate the payroll area later. That's very convenient of them to do so. And please make sure to check this drop-down menu and pick your, either if you select covered period or alternate covered period, because that will change the spreadsheet later on in calculating the final incurred amount of the final payroll. So So we have populated a couple amounts here. As you can see, we have chosen covered period here. So it refers to this part. And we started on May 5th, but you can see that our first payroll started on May 1st. But if you choose covered period, May 1st, you start with May 1st instead of May 5th. So just letting you know of that. And as we scroll down, you can enter your payroll cost, like group health, retirement. You can enter your vendor here, your amounts here. It will totally populate on the right-hand side. And the worksheet will work as magic later on. And here, your expenses, it all refers to your weeks. So those are all correlated. And here's a reminder of your covered period. So everything within that period is expenses is forgivable. Within the forgivable calculation, at least. So here above, here's a summary. Where after you enter all that data, here's a percentage of what your payroll costs for forgivable summary amount is. So far, the payroll cost that I've entered is 69%, and the covered cost is 31%. So you can see that your covered cost cannot exceed 40% because your payroll cost has to be at least 60%. Has there been any changes to that, Karen? It's still 60%, right?
Yeah, it used to be 75%, and then with the PPP Flexibility Act that went into effect on June 5, it was reduced. Almost all of the changes, by the way, to the PPP program since it was initially put in place have been favorable to you, the borrower. So it was reduced to 60%, you know, at that time, and that's great because that means you can use other costs if you've had to let people go. In other words, I think what's really happening is the government's doing their best to try to help you get to 100% loan forgiveness and keep this money and keep people employed and, you know, keep the shop up and running.
Okay, so it's good that they're lowering the requirements.
Yeah.
Okay. And here are the calculations that will be done after you fill out the SMW tab and the FTE tab. There'll be a net forgiven portion of the loan. They'll calculate for you what amount of your loan that you have entered is forgivable by this spreadsheet's calculation. So, Karen, do you have anything to add to this?
Jeff, ask me that question. I'm trying to do the Q&As live, so ask me the question one more time.
Oh, okay. Just, do you have anything to add to the summary part of the forgiveness summary part?
Let me just remind people that first of all, you've got a couple different shots at the salary and wage reduction and the FTE reduction. Your first go around here is to try to, you know, whether on a basis, an actual basis or a forecast basis, be completing what your costs are. And as you can see, and Jeff, maybe you can show them where that that total covered cost is, the $133,000. Maybe highlight that. You're trying to get that up to the $155,000 over in cell D5, right? To get that up to your loan amount here. Okay, so that's, you know, your first goal. And then, you know, once you've gotten that at or above there, then you're working on whether you are either eligible for the safe harbors on if you had to reduce people's salaries beyond 25%, or if the FTEs fell over time. Now, if you're what we're showing you here is both for the salary and wage reduction, if you had to make that, and the FTE reduction, if you had to make that, there's a gross amount and then there's a post-forgiveness amount. So let's look at the FTE ratio before the safe harbor in that little summary. Just even looking at the summary, the FTE ratio for the safe harbor is 104.6%. Well, since it's more than 100%, your FTEs are more than what they were during the base period. You are fine. You don't even need to go through the safe harbor. calculation. You're not going to have any reduction for that. Let's look up at salary and wage. Here, the gross amount in this example that's been set up in here, and by the way, it's a nonsense example, but it's just to show you how the functionality of the spreadsheet works. You can see that the gross reduction is $22,600. But after going through the safe harbor calculations, the reduction is only $549. So in this case, you were able to get up to 133 of the maximum 155, and then that was further reduced by $549. And so you've ended up with 132,500. Basically, in the summary box is just putting it all together for you so you can see it all easily in a summary fashion. Some people use the spreadsheet to do forecasting, so you can forecast a couple different scenarios. What if I brought this person back but not this person? What if I reduce this pay but not that pay? And then you can see what it does to your loan forgiveness by just looking back to this little box here and seeing what the effect is. In fact, one of the things I would recommend as you're using this is, change colors for what you've put in as actual as you go along and what's forecast, so that you have, an actual color and forecast color, and then that way you'll know what needs to be updated as you keep going.
Oh, thanks, Karen.
Thanks, you, Jeff.
So let's move on to the next tab, if we're okay with this tab. So just a reminder, you can only edit the blue sections of the spreadsheet, because we don't want to have any changes to the formulas that might cause some problem for the final calculation. So,
Jeff, what if I need to add some more columns though, or what if I need to add some more rows here? What do I do?
Then you can unlock the spreadsheet by entering a password. The password is capital P, LACE, so place with a capital P and an exclamation mark, and 8375. We'll enter it into the chat for you guys if you guys want a visual of it.
Okay, Jeff, I'm going to put that in the chat then.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Just to let you know, for all the spreadsheets, there are some hidden rows or columns. Let's say in this spreadsheet from V on, there's a lot of hidden spreadsheets. I've just created those so that you can, in case you have 24 periods of pay, you can extend that hidden rows and columns and to add it in. So you don't have to create your own and possibly edit some formulas and mess up the calculation. We don't want that for you to have to go through and fixing it. So that might be easier if you can just unhide. I'll unhide it to let you guys see. Sorry, a little bit laggy. That's okay. I have trouble with that, but you can feel free to unhide any hidden rows and see if you need those hidden rows and columns. So for this second spreadsheet, second tab, S&W reduction, it's a breakdown of all the payroll data that you have by employees. So you can enter all your employees over on the left side, their last 4 digits of social security number if you need it for tracking. And over here, if they have earned over, was it 100K, Karen?
Yep.
There's that threshold.
That's right. That's what threshold is, 100,000 per year. So as you are filling out the PPP loan application, what you're going to see is that in the actual application, it's going to divide the employees physically between making below more and making less. And you can certainly go through and sort this data if you want to get it to look that way. But we thought you might want to put the data in however your data comes out from your payroll reports. So we've done some of the totaling before in the spreadsheet. Jeff's very good with spreadsheets, so he's got some of the totals for the different boxes down below, and you can just put the data in any order you want, and it will make the adjustments for you for whether an employee is making more than 100,000 or less than 100,000. It's just as a reminder on the salary and wage reduction, if you reduce the wage of somebody making more than 100,000 by 50%, the government doesn't care. They're looking at those who are making less than $100,000 a year, and those they care about. If you reduce the pay of somebody who makes less than 100,000 by more than 25%, then you're going to have a reduction to your PPP loan forgiveness. But the spreadsheet will take care of that for you.
So for this first section, you entered your Q1 for 2020. That's going to be your base calculation. Your first quarter's payroll total are entered here. So what should I add for additions and subtractions? Should I put anything there?
For the additions and subtractions, you might have something that you need to add or subtract depending on how your payroll company, Jeff, gives you your report. You might have to subtract, for instance, depending on how they give you the report, you might have to subtract out FICA.
Okay.
And there may be other things that you pay people that just don't count as compensation. Expense reimbursement, if they've given you a report that has expense reimbursements in there, you might have to subtract that out.
So that's something that I can talk with my payroll company.
Yeah, you have to understand, right, figure out what's in that number, and then you're going to try to get that. Then you're going to make additions and subtractions that then are going to get you to the same basis. Now, Jeff, we don't have the additions and subtractions shown for the 8-week or 24-week covered period here, but you still have to use the same methodology. Whatever you're using for that base calculation, then that's just to put it to the top of your mind, but you're going to use that same methodology, whatever you use here for the additions and subtractions, over here in the covered period forgiveness portion of the spreadsheet too.
So to have a consistency, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So let's see. So it'll calculate the maximum allowed for forgiveness in this column per employee. So, okay. So that's the base calculation for quarter one. Let's move on to this area. So this is either whether you have picked 8-week or 24-week of covered period forgiveness. So I'm going to enter all the payrolls per employees once again.
Jeff,
payroll, right?
Jeff, I see that at the top you haven't needed to enter the payrolls this time. Is that because it's pulling it from the summary?
Oh, you mean these numbers?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, they are all referring to the summary tab since you have entered some data there already. And
great.
All you have to do is just enter the breakdown of that total number. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Jeff. That's good.
So so completing this area and moving on to the right-hand side, back to the safe harbor. If Karen, you could lead us, there's a lot of different terms here: annualized cash compensation, average annualized cash compensation for this period, average annual. It's just a lot of complicated wordings. Can you kind of do us a walkthrough over that, Karen, of why the safe harbor and what it is actually doing?
Absolutely. So, the way the spreadsheet is set up, as you can see in column AM, you have a reduction before applying the safe harbor. And that's the amount that you're trying to use. You can see here it's about $22,000 down at the bottom, $22,600 or some dollars. That's what you're trying to now figure out. Can I get that reduced down some? So all the rest of these steps here are looking at whether you can get that amount reduced, hopefully all the way to zero, because it'd be best not to reduce your forgiveness if you don't have to. So the column AO then is where you're looking to see if reductions were made versus 2019. And if they were, then you're going to be eligible for doing the safe harbor calculations in the other columns. The annualized cash compensation column here as of 2/15 is going to be the first test you're going to do. You're going to actually look and see, what the annualized compensation is. So Jeff, in this case, what was our pay period? Did we have a semi-monthly pay period, for instance, or what? What's our pay?
This one's semi-monthly pay period.
Okay, so Jeff, I'm thinking that the way this would work for people is that they would be taking that semi-monthly pay period and multiplying that by 24. Okay, so that would get you to an annualized compensation
Okay. So it's just your pay period, try to extend it to a full year, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretend like every pay period was the same as that pay period that contained the 215.
So weekly pay periods will be 52 times 52.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
Yep, and biweekly will be 26.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so once you've got that done, then that is basically going to be, test column 1, all right? And then test column 2, the annualized cash compensation between 215 and 426. I know that looks kind of weird, doesn't it? 215 to 426, like where did that come from? But basically, that's coming from the fact that the government is saying the pandemic kind of started, or it didn't really start until 215. So there's no, that's what they're kind of using as a base or starting point. And the 426 is 30 days after passage of the original CARES Act. Okay, that set up this PPP loan. So that's how that period got defined. They're saying that, look, from about the time of February 15, when this whole thing started, and you get about 30 days after the end of the legislation being set up. Let's look at that. And if you did not reduce the compensation of people during that period, then beyond the 25%, if they made under $100,000, then there's not going to be any reduction. So you're not going to have to worry about it. Now, if there was a reduction, then that final column, the average annual, as of 12/31/2020, becomes quite important, because you're going to have to wait until 12/31. This used to be June 30th. But in the PPP Flexibility Act, this moved to 12/31. So, if you need to wait, you're going to need to wait now. And on 12/31, if you have raised the pay back up so that it's at least at 75% of what it was, then you will get your full safe harbor. Okay, so all these calculations are embedded here for you. You have a gross safe harbor reduction that's getting calculated over in column AM. You're testing to see if you're eligible for the safe harbor in column AP and AQ. You're actually conducting the safe harbor in column AR, and then you get the final results there for your reduction in column AS.
And all shown up and summarized in the summary tab.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Which is right here.
That's exactly right, Jeff. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on. Shall we move on to the FTE tab?
Let's do it.
Okay. So over here, the full-time equivalent calculations for the forgiveness. So there's a area here where you can pick if you want to do simplified FTE or no. We often would want to recommend people to use yes if they have a lot of employees?
I'm looking at all the Q&A, so we got a lot.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's okay.
So, go ahead and re-ask that one, Jeff, and let's get that one answered. Then we're going to stop, I think, and pause and answer a few questions live for people.
Oh, okay, sure. So the FTE is calculated by if a person is full-time is a 1. If a person is not a full-time is a 0.5. That's
correct. And full-time, the government uses 40 hours a week. So if your work week is standardly 36 hours, that's your standard full-time, it doesn't matter. For the government's calculations, it's 40 hours per week is full-time. So when you're doing these FTE calculations, everything will be based on a 40-hour work week. Now, it's not going to hurt you because let's just say you did have a 36 or a 0.9 FTE. You know, if all your FTEs were 0.9, they're all going to stay 0.9. So it's not going to hurt you relatively in terms of calculating a reduction. But it could be funny to see that somebody who you think of as full-time in the spreadsheet looks like they're only 0.9 or 90% of full-time. And that's just the way the government has said to calculate it.
Mm-hmm. So just the reason to use simplified FTE is just for time saving. Is there other benefits that come with it?
You know, I don't really think there's anything other than that. It's so much simpler and it will save you quite a bit of time. So let's just assume that, you know, all your employees, all of them are less than 40 hours. Okay, then you could call every employee a 0.5, both in your base or your reference period and in your covered period. And it just makes it so easy to get to be able to show that you haven't had a change in this more simplified way of looking at it. And it could be that when you broke that down and actually looked at the actual FTEs, you might have taken somebody who was 90% down to 45%, right? You might have taken somebody who you thought of as half-time, part-time, down to full-time, down to part-time. Well, it doesn't matter. They're all under 40 hours, so they're all going to get 0.5, and that reduction is just not going to show up at all in the calculation if you use the 1.0 and the 0.5 there, because they'll just stay at 0.5. So you can see that there could be a real benefit to using the simplified methodology, in addition even to what Jeff has pointed out, which is that if people are at, it's simpler. It's just going to save you a lot of time too.
Good to know. Thank you, Karen. For the reference periods, is there one that I should choose? How do I know which reference period I should check on?
Hey, that's a super question, Jeff. So the first two are at your option. You can look at it first one way and then the other way, and whichever's more beneficial to you, choose that one. The third one is an option if you're seasonal. If you're a seasonal employer, then your reference period, you can pick any 12-week consecutive period between May 1 and September 15 of 2019 as your reference period. And depending on how your seasonality works, let's just say you are a school, you might want to pick the summer period for your reference period, so you have the lowest number of full-time equivalent employees. If you are a camp that operates mostly in the summer, you might want to focus on the portion that goes towards September. Maybe you don't have so many people in August, September because all the kids have gone back to school. So you might want to push it to the later side. So depending on how your seasonality works, you might want to choose this reference period 3 and use that to do your base calculations from.
Mm-hmm. So for, let's say reference 1 has a higher FTE, would that be more beneficial for forgiveness? Or is it a lower FTE that would be more beneficial?
Great question, Jeff. So it's the one that gives you the lowest, right? Because
the
you're
lowest, yeah.
going to compare yourself to. And
so the least amount of changes to your covered period, the one that matches the best is the best forgiveness.
Yeah, the one from which you can show the least change.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Growth.
Okay, thank you for that. And let's move on to this lower section. Same over here, enter the same employees you have. And if there is a reduction, there is a drop-down menu where you can pick why, because if there are documented and reasonable specific reasons, the forgiveness, the reduction can be exempt. Is that correct, Karen?
Yeah, what are the reasons? Why don't you show us that pull-down menu, Jeff, and maybe blow it up a little?
Sure, yeah, let me zoom in for all of this. So here's Person one, employee rejected rehire offer, fired for cause, voluntarily resigned, employee requested reduction. These are all causes that are exceptions, right?
That's right. So if you have one of these that applies, and as Chip said, it's so important that you have the right documentation. If you don't have the right documentation, it might as well not apply. So let's just say you did one of these things, or one of these things happened to you and you didn't document it, and there's no way you can get the documentation done for whatever reason. Don't check it. You need to have the substantiation. Jeff's going to, in a little while, walk you through some of the documents required. And you'll see that there's a lot of documentation, even if it doesn't have to go in with your PPP loan application. You've got to have that documentation for it. So, but if you have the documentation and one of these reasons happen, the spreadsheet and your loan application, the forgiveness loan application, will actually just not worry about that person. They're not going to count against you. You're going to need to talk to your banker to see whether they want you to exclude the person from the beginning or just count them, as a forgiven person. When I look at the application, I think it's the latter. You're going to leave the person in, but you're just going to count it as as a forgiveness that it's a person you're going to get forgiveness for. Does that answer the question, Jeff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Very detailed. So some of you might be curious why person one's pay period is 68, more than 40. It's all because of our pay period semi-monthly. So if you are weekly, then you'll see perhaps 40 for a full-time person, or 35, however your company calculates for full-time. But you can see that on the right-hand side, 86.7 hours for our semi-monthly pay period example is 1. So it all changes. Even if you have picked weekly pay period and you enter 40, it'll still be 1. The formula takes from your pay period, whatever pay period and whatever hours that you have paid for that person in that pay period, it's automatically calculated into this ratio. So you don't have to worry about what pay period you use and whether if your hours are over 40. And so we kind of save that calculating hassle for you. So you can just rely on this average FTE on the right-hand side, and it'll do all the tedious calculations for you for our example, 13.47 employees, right? 13 and a half employees. So on the right-hand side, just to remind you, on the left-hand side, that's the reference period. On this green side is your covered period. So it's comparing your reference or base with your covered period to see if there are any changes to your FTEs. For our covered period, you can see that it's 14.09. So this company actually hired more people, hired half more employee. So that is interesting to see. So on the right-hand side, this is the safe harbor again. Karen, would you like to go over this for us?
Sure, be happy to. Essentially, you've calculated and compared your FTEs in the covered period to your base or your reference period. Now, if it came out that those were more, then you don't need to worry about the safe harbor, okay? But if it came out less, then there's still a chance that you're going to get your PPP, your total PPP loan forgiveness. Again, let's just say you had I'm going to go through a very simple example here. Let's just say you had 4 employees and you let 1 go through the covered period versus your reference period. So you were down to 0.75 or 75% of your employment. That reduction, that 25% would reduce your PPP loan forgiveness by that amount. If you were eligible for $100,000 of loan forgiveness, you would only get $75,000 $100,000 because you let go 25% of your hours of your staff. And so you're going to lose 25% of your loan forgiveness. Now, in this case that we have set up in here, it actually went up, so you don't have that problem. But if you did, let's just say you did have that in your spreadsheet or in your case, in your situation, then the safe harbor calculation is for you. You want to actually look at the FTEs during the period that encompass your 215 payroll and write, track those. You're going to track them person by person, but you're going to look at the total. And then you're going to look at your FTEs during the period from 215 to 426. Those numbers, those periods should sound familiar to you from the salary and wage reduction tab. And then if those fell, if the FTEs fell, and in this case it looks like, just again, this is all dummy information put in here, but in this tiny part of the example here, it did fall to 10.91. So in this case, this organization is then eligible for the safe harbor on the FTE, which means waiting until 12/31 and then seeing if the FTEs made it back up to the amount in the reference period. So Jeff, if you go back over to the end of that reference period, let's go, just back a little bit further there, keep going. So in this case, if your employees made it back up to the 13.47 by December 31st, 2020, then you're going to get your entire loan forgiveness. So, but the safe harbor requires you, and let's go back to that safe harbor little piece there. You actually have to go through and calculate first if you're eligible for the safe harbor. So to calculate that eligibility, it's looking at the total of the FTEs in that payroll. That includes 215. It's looking at any reductions. You had to have made a reduction to be eligible for this particular. And then if you did make in that time period, and if you did make a reduction, then you can look on 12/31 and see if everything's been fixed back to what it was. And if it is, you're going to get 100% of your loan forgiveness.
Oh, that's pretty sweet, 100% loan forgiveness. So should we have some Q&A just to answer some of...
Yeah, let's do that. Do you want to first go through just show them those document requirements real quick, and then we'll go through some Q&A.
Okay. These are the documents required for if you elect to use, qualify to use 3508, which is everyone. And let's see. So there's payroll, documentation for FTE, non-payroll.
It's broken into what you're required to submit and then what you have to keep. That's pretty important. And you can read this yourselves.
Yeah, this is not for maintenance, to maintain, and this is to submit. Okay. And same thing with the EZ form. These are the things that you have to submit for the loan forgiveness for the EZ form, and this is the documents that you have to maintain. So there's a lot of reading that needs to happen there.
Great. So Jeff, let's go back through, and if we can go back to the salary and wage tab, there's for the additions part of the, where we have the base period for the additions and reductions. A couple people have asked questions about what about housing or auto allowance? And yes, your payroll company is quite likely to miss housing allowance, and you may have to add that manually. That's a great question there. And they're quite likely to miss an auto allowance too in their calculations. So you can look at what your payroll company sends you, and if you need to add either of those two elements to that, then those would be valid additions to that. That answers a couple of our questions. All right, let me go through here and see what else we got. Do payroll costs include employer FICA or employee FICA and FIT, federal? I presume this is your federal unemployment tax. or only net pay. In other words, gross pays less employee withholdings for employee FICA and FIT. So payroll costs, if your payroll company gives you employer FICA included in those payroll costs, you are going to take that out in the subtractions column because you're not allowed to include that for payroll costs. Okay, so you cannot include any employer paid federal taxes, but you can include state and local employer paid taxes and tax-like things. So you can include the state, your state unemployment. Okay, now there's questions still on workers' comp. I think the answer is boiling down to, from all the reading I've done, is boiling down to no. You would check with your banker, I think, when it comes to a detail like that, where my recommendation, and you've seen this through all the webinars, has been put it all down and then check with your banker, and see what they say. But my most recent reading is that the workers' comp's not quite close enough to a payroll tax because it's more of a job function tax instead of a payroll-based tax. But there's no harm writing it down. And from the prior webinars we've done that we've suggested that you highlight anything that's questionable. Okay, so let's look at a few more questions. Here's a question, another question about auto and housing, that's done. If we give an employee a health insurance stipend instead of paying their coverage, can we count that? They're saying here is salary, but I'm pretty sure what they mean is as any kind of a payroll covered cost. If that stipend is taxable, then that's includable as salary. If it's not taxable, I think it's going to probably depend on whether that stipend is part of a real plan, an actual healthcare plan, like a health savings account or something like that. I'm going to again point you toward your bank to get the answer to that. As you saw in the PPP loan application itself, banks, a different bank, from bank to bank, they will give you different guidance. A lot of the banks said up front, no, you can't include housing allowance, and no, you can't include auto allowance. And then as time moved on, it became clear you could, but you still didn't get that in your PPP loan because your bank made the determination you weren't going to get it. So hopefully that answers that question. Here's another question. Is anything based on the actual paycheck date, or is everything based on the pay period? So for this question, we need to get into the definition of incurred versus paid. And to simplify the initial guidance from on the PPP loan forgiveness was something had to be both paid and incurred during the PPP loan forgiveness period. But now, the good news is that at least for the initial going into the period, the day you pay the payroll is, what matters. If you paid it, even if it wasn't all incurred in the first period, if you paid it in the your covered period, then it's going to count. So let's just take an example of your period started. Jeff showed us, when the loan dispersed in the first tab, he showed us that that's when technically your covered period starts, unless you've chosen the alternate covered period. And let's just say your covered period started May 15th. And you pay your people for the period of May 1 through May 15th on May 20th. Well, on May 20th, when you pay them for that period from May 1 to May 15th, you're going to be able to include that in your Jeff, if you go back to that first tab, you can show them that payroll there. You're going to be able to include that. Now, we had in some of the early versions of this spreadsheet, this payroll one here in column D, 38, 39. We initially had this split up into incurred during the period and paid during the period. But, and that's the way the original verbiage came out. But since that time, in some of the Q&As that the Small Business Administration and the Treasury Department have put out, they've basically simplified this and said, look, if your pay is falling in this early pay is falling in the pay period, then that's fine, put it in. Now, on the other hand, at the end of the pay period, they are saying for that, you do have to go through the exercises saying, you know, was it incurred? And if it was incurred, even if it was paid later, as long as it's paid on time, it's fine. You just put you're gonna apportion that final one. If you get to the point where you need to. Most of you are going to be done with your loan forgiveness before you get to 24 weeks, virtually all of you. But if some of you get there and you have to allocate something for the end of the 24th week or the 8th week, you're going to do that only in the circumstances for your payroll. And down below, don't forget too, there's more questions about, like, for rent, if you weren't able to pay your rent for a few months, can you rent? And you do pay it with your PPP loan, can that count for forgiveness? And again, I would say, talk to your banker. The conservative way to think about it is, you know, if it's your normal pay, rent due date, and it falls in the covered period, it's fine. I'd be a little more cautious about including unpaid rents, but I have heard plenty of people saying, my plan is to put my unpaid rent from the prior 2 months in my calculation, and there's nothing that says that comes right out and says that you can't do that. Let's see, here's another, okay, so that's answered another couple questions. Let's see, here's a question. Is my understanding correct? If my FTE pre and post COVID counts are the same, or post is greater than pre, then I don't need to use the safe harbor to get the maximum forgiveness. Correct. So that is correct, but don't forget, in addition to looking at your FTE counts, and Jeff, maybe you can go back to that FTE count, and just as a reminder to people, if you go through the FTE reductions and you come up with, let's go to the FTE reduction tab. And then if you're in the covered period, if this FTE is greater than what it was in your reference period, you actually don't need the safe harbor at all, because you haven't experienced a reduction in your FTEs. Don't forget though, it's not just FTEs. There's two things you're looking at. One is salary and wages, and one is FTEs. So if you kept all your hours the same, but cut the pay of people in half, then you are still going to have a reduction to your loan forgiveness for that. And that's going to be equal to, in theory, the cut of 50% up to the 75%. So 25% of your salary and wages are going to be reduced from your loan forgiveness, unless some of your people made more than 100,000, in which case they're not going to count against you. Any reductions to people against 100,000 won't count against you. So that's a great question too. Good question, David. And let me just see, Jeff, I'm going to just look and see if there's one or two others we can answer. It is 12:30. And if we don't get your question answered, please know that you can write your question to info@missionwell.com, and it will, then we'll do our best to answer it for you. Here's another question. Once complete, is the worksheet to be submitted to the lending institution, or is there a summary page? So this worksheet will basically allow you to very rapidly fill out the loan application. So I'm going to hold up a piece of paper here. There's there's basically out on the website. We'll put it up on our website too, so you can see it really quickly. But there's the short version and the long version. It's like a 13-page document. The longer version is, and even the short one's about 8 pages. So with instructions. If you fill out the spreadsheet is intended to help you with planning, right? To help you figure out how do you maximize your loan forgiveness. But if you keep filling that out faithfully during your loan forgiveness period, you'll have everything you need in the spreadsheet to fill out the information on that application, it'll be a snap. It'll just go really, really fast. But that's a great question. I think we'll answer, let's see, let me find one more to answer. And I'm going to apologize, but we're out of time for a lunch and learn after that. 2 of our employees are paid monthly full-time, and the other 7 are paid bi-weekly part-time. Will this form work for us? No, not quite. You'd have to do kind of like, copy some of these 3 main tabs, the summary, S&W reduction, and FTE reduction. Copy those tabs and pick the bi-monthly, and then pick the semi-monthly, and then pick the the bi-weekly, and do that, and then add things up more manually. So it's not really set up for that, but that would be the workaround there. Well, I just want to thank you, Jeff, for, are there any last comments or observations you want to make, Jeff, before we?
No, not at the moment, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I'm grateful to you, Jeff, for having worked so hard on this spreadsheet. Thank you so much for everything you did. And I know that all the people who are on the call are grateful too. Jeff and I, and all of us at Missionwell, really hope that this helps you with your planning and with the actual filling out of your PPP loan forgiveness application. We here at Missionwell are here for you. If you do have further questions, we will do our best to take the questions that didn't get answered right now in the Q&A. We'll grab those from there and try to put out one Q&A document up on the website within a day or 2 to answer any unanswered questions. And again, keep checking back at our website. And if you do have a question that needs to be answered, or you see a problem with the spreadsheet, write to us at info@missionwell.com, and we'll give you the help that you need. So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Jeff, for all the work that you've done, and we will look forward to talking to you soon.